Off grid while on grid. Cool Bob here. Please take time to subscribe to this channel and share these videos. Cool Bob back at you. This time we're going to talk about the basics of chainsaw chain. The few things that you need to know to find the right chain that works for you and your situation, and give you the pointers of what's out there on the shelf so that you don't mix them up. It's very basic. There's only about 3 sizes to worry about and a couple of variations within that. When we're talking about chainsaw chain, there's basically 3 sizes. And what I mean by that is the pitch and the style of chain. Yes, before somebody jumps on me, I know that there's a couple other sizes, but for the average user, they'll never see anything but the 2 pitches in the 3 sizes. So we're going to jump into this. Basically, what you've got is what we call 3/8 pitch and 3/25 pitch. Now, what that means is the distance between 3 rivets divided by 2. 325 being half that figure would be 0.325, and the 3/8 would be 0.375. But because in America we don't generally use a designation like that, we like the fractional character, and that would be 3/8. Now in 3/8 we have what we call standard 3/8, and then we have what we call 3/8 low profile. The distance is the same, so the pitch is the same on both chains, but the difference being this is a smaller chain for smaller saws. If you put a large tooth like this on a small saw, you'd bog it down. So we have 2 sizes to work with, and in between these 2 sizes we have, quote, the medium size chain, and that would be your 325. Now that pitch is different, so therefore when you're putting a chain on your saw, your sprocket is a certain pitch. So you have to have a 325 pitch or a 375 pitch, which would be 3/8 on the saw. So another thing you need to know is that's your only basic right there. Let's just stop right there. The only 2 sizes is 3/8 and 325 that you really need to worry about. 1/4 inch, 404, all that pretty much out the door. The average person will never see any of it. Now, the 325 here, I refer to as medium, and then we've got the 3/8 low profile and standard. So we've got the pitch covered. Now we're going to cover the gauge. A lot of people will say, oh, it's 50 gauge or 63 gauge. There's basically 4 gauges. 43 gauge, 50 gauge, 58 gauge, and 63 gauge. A lot of steel saws use 63 gauge. In my personal opinion, I think they do that just so that because less shops carry it, so their dealers are more protected. But it doesn't really matter. The chains are going to work the same. It's just that if you have a bar with a 50 gauge groove in it, you have to use 50 gauge. If you have a bar with a 63 gauge groove, you can't use the 50 gauge because it would rock back and forth, causing the saw to cut in an arc and actually not cut at all sometimes. So what is the gauge? The gauge is the thickness of the driver. The driver is this piece right here. This piece here, you can see it on the 325, this little triangle down here. This is the driver. Same here on this large 3/8, this is the driver. And the gauge is the thickness of that driver. So if I measure the thickness of this driver, you'll see that that is 050. So this would be a 50 gauge piece of chain on the drivers. A 63 would measure 63 thousandths. Same with the 58, a 58 thousandths. Occasionally, you'll run across a 3/8 in a 43 thousandths. It's not real common, but it is out there. You'll see it occasionally. You'll know that because I'm going to show you how to tell by looking at your bar which ones you need. So 3/8 low profile, 325, and 3/8 standard in either 43, 50, 58, or 63 gauge. Now, another thing you need to know is when you're buying chain, you'll see a number, for instance, 72 or 68 or 57. There's different numbers. Matter of fact, let me just grab this bar to show you up close. I don't know if we're going to be able to see this, but I'm going to point out that right here is a picture of a driver. And beside this picture is the number 67. Now, what that tells us is the loop of chain that we're going to put around this bar needs 67 drives so that it fits and adjusts properly. Now, another thing on this bar, I don't know if you can see it, but right here, it's marked 063. So that means we will need 63 gauge, and right here it's marked 325. So this bar on with the saw that it goes on, this happens to fit a steel saw, would be a 325 pitch, 63 gauge with 67 drives. That way, when you know what this means, you can go in and pick up a pre-cut chain off a shelf and know what you're reaching for. I'm going to pick up this other bar here, and I don't know if we'll be able to see it, but we're going to try here. We've got 3/8. We have a picture of the driver, 72, and at the end here, 0.050. So we know by reading this that this is a 3/8 pitch, 72 drive count, 050. Now you're going to say, well, is it low profile or is it standard? Low profile is generally never on a saw with more than about 65 drives. Generally it's less than that. Generally your 325 doesn't exceed about 65 or 66, but most of the time they're down in the 50 count range. So because this is 72 drives and it's a large bar, we know it's going to be standard profile or standard full size. A couple of other items that you might want to look at on chain. I don't have any here to really break it down. Is what we call the complement. The next thing we want to talk about is the complement of the chain. Now, all I've got is standard complement here, so I'm going to try to show you. And what I mean by standard complement is you have one tooth, one tie strap, another tooth. So we have a tooth, a blank, a tooth, a blank, a tooth. Occasionally you'll get what's called skip tooth. There are reasons to use skip tooth, but most people do it just for cost because it costs a little less generally to make a chain with only half as many teeth. The companies really like that because they're saving 50% of their cost in teeth by just doing what we call tooth, skip, skip, tooth. So you'll run into that occasionally. It doesn't matter, it'll cut fine. It's generally a price point. The only other reason you would use skip tooth is it does help if you're trying to mill lumber. But when you're milling lumber, we want a different angle on the tooth. You can do that by hand, or you can actually buy a milling chain. And one of the differences is that on most milling chains, it's what we call skip tooth. So that you can tooth, skip, skip, and another tooth. That leaves enough room to pull the larger shavings out and get them out of the way so that the saw cuts smoother and quicker. Now that we've covered the styles of the pitch and the gauge and the drives, there's only two basic styles that you're going to see in chain when it comes to cutters. There's what we call semi-chisel and full chisel. Now this is what we call a full chisel, and this is what we call a semi-chisel. I actually have another semi-chisel right here to compare these two. These are both 3/8 standard pitch or standard size. So let me give you an idea of what it's all about when we're talking about chisel or semi-chisel. The biggest difference is when you look at the tooth, there's a flat on the top, and then you've got your side. Well, on a full chisel, it comes straight across, and then it's a 90 degrees straight down the side. With a semi-chisel, it comes straight across, but on the side here, you have a radius on the edge. So you can see it's radiused. I'm hoping you can see this on the camera. See if we can get it up a little closer here. That should show the radius. And then on the full chisel, you'll see that it's a 90 degrees. Straight up, straight down, straight across. Get back in frame there. Okay. You're straight across and then straight down. There's no radius on this edge where my tip of the pencil is. The only problem with chisel versus semi-chisel, chisel cuts very fast. Semi-chisel cuts a little slower. Most consumers won't notice the difference that much. But what the general consumer does notice is that a full chisel gets dull quicker than a semi-chisel. And the reason for that, get our two chains up here. When you look at, see if we get it rotated here. Get a good picture of this. This tooth comes to a needle tip right here because of the 90 degrees. You've got 90-degree angle here, and it's going to come to a needle tip. That's full chisel. On a semi-chisel, because of the radius of the outside edge, let's see if we can get that up there. With this radius, it causes a cutting surface that's slightly rounded. Let's see if we can get it there. You've got, it doesn't come to a needle tip, it comes to just a cutting edge, and it's radiused around. So therefore, this will stay sharper longer on standard cutting. Now, nothing stays sharp longer if you touch dirt. The moment you touch the ground or any object other than wood, the saw becomes dull. People say, oh, I just bumped the dirt. Well, just bumping it is enough to take off the tip of every one of these teeth. And if you just lightly ding these teeth, then that chain is not going to cut right, and you're forcing it to cut from then on. Now here's a piece of used chain I got out just to give us an idea. And when you hit it, I don't know if the camera is going to pick this up. I'm going to try it here. But if you get the light just right, you'll see it shiny right here. If you can see anything shine or glare, what that is bent material. Now the tooth doesn't look bad, but it only takes a few thousandths of an inch to cause the chain to not cut properly. Let's see what we've got right here. Now this one, I don't know if we're going to be able to get it in there also, but you can see this is full chisel, but you can see it's missing that needle tip right on the tip of this tooth. You can visually look at a tooth and tell whether or not it's sharp just by watching the leading edge like that. So we'll get into sharpening a little later and splicing and cutting chains in a different video. But this will give you the basics so you'll have an understanding to go look at your bar and your chain and be able to go down to Lowe's or Home Depot or anywhere else or a shop and say, I need 325 pitch, I need a 63 gauge, and I need it in the 67 drive count. That way you can fit your saws without having to take a chain with you or have any miscommunications on what you actually need.